My name is Rachel Anderson, and before I tell you how I tore my family's world down to its foundations, I need to ask a quick favor. Where are you tuning in from today? Drop your city or country in the comments below. I love seeing how far these stories travel. And if you want to make sure you never miss the rest of this journey, hit that subscribe button right now and turn on the bell notification so you get updated the second the next chapter drops. Trust me, you are going to want to hear every single word of this. For 34 years, my family viewed me as the baseline for disappointment. In the Anderson household, success wasn't measured by quiet integrity or personal peace. It was measured by public applause, local news features, and high-dollar political campaign contributions. My mother, Lydia, and my father, Richard, ran our domestic life like a political machine. Everything was about optics. My sister, Sophia, was their crown jewel. She was light, charm, and ambition wrapped up in tailored cream-colored suits. From the moment she stepped out of law school, my parents began paving her runway toward state politics. By 30, she was running for a highly contested seat in the state legislature. Dad poured his real estate fortune into her war chest, and Mom organized the high society galas that kept her name on the lips of every power broker in the state. And then there was me. I was the daughter who chose a modest state university over an Ivy League legacy. I was the child who preferred the quiet solitude of legal research to candidate meet and greets. When I passed the bar exam on my first try, my father didn't celebrate. He merely noted that my score wasn't high enough to make the front page of the local bar journal. When I took a job as a research clerk for a federal appellate judge, rather than joining a lucrative private firm, my mother told her friends I was finding myself in administrative work. To them, I was the failed child, the background noise, the girl who lacked the spark to ever amount to anything that mattered. What they didn't know, what I took meticulous care to hide from them, was that while they were busy vanity chasing in state politics, I was executing a masterclass in quiet, unyielding ambition. I didn't want political rallies. I wanted real, structural power. I spent years working 16-hour days in the dark corners of the federal judiciary, writing opinions that shaped law, earning the deep respect of senior judges, legal scholars, and Senate confirmation committees. 6 months ago, after a grueling, highly classified confirmation process, I took a solemn oath. At 34 years old, I was appointed to the federal bench, taking a lifetime seat on the United States District Court. I chose not to tell them. Call it petty or call it self-preservation, but I knew what they would do. They would turn my lifetime appointment into a photo opportunity for Sophia's campaign. They would pretend they had mentored me into it, so I kept my private life completely separate. My parents lived in their small, noisy world of county politics, and I lived in mine, wearing the black robe of a federal judge in a district 2 hours away, presiding over cases that altered corporate landscapes and human lives. To them, I was still just Rachel, the unemployed, struggling legal consultant who lived in a plain apartment and barely scraped by. I let them believe it. It kept them distant. It kept me safe. Until a rainy Tuesday night in November. It was midnight when my phone rang. I picked up to the sound of my mother's hyperventilating breath, layered over the heavy thump of windshield wipers. "Rachel, you need to get down to Oak Ridge Road right now," Mom commanded, her voice sharp, frantic, but carrying that familiar edge of authority she always used on me. "Do not ask questions. Just get here. Bring your car." When I arrived at the deserted stretch of two-lane highway, the scene was horrifying. Sophia's sleek silver sedan was idling on the shoulder, its front bumper crumpled like aluminum foil around a snapped wooden fence post. A few yards back in the ditch lay a wrecked motor scooter, its single headlight feebly illuminating the misty rain. Sophia was leaning against the passenger side of her car, her face pale, her expensive silk blouse stained with mud. My father was pacing the blacktop, his phone pressed to his ear, shouting at someone to keep the local press off the police scanners. "What happened?" I asked, stepping out into the cold rain. "Is someone hurt?" "A man on a scooter," Sophia sobbed, though there were no tears in her eyes, only terror. "He turned out of nowhere, Rachel." "I had a glass of wine at the fundraiser, maybe 2. If the police test me, if this gets out. My campaign is over. The election is in 3 weeks. Did you call an ambulance?" I demanded, turning toward the ditch. "Dad called a private medical service," Mom snapped, grabbing my arm with a grip like steel. Her eyes locked onto mine, hard and merciless. "Listen to me, Rachel. The paramedics are taking the man away. He's stable, but he has a broken leg. The local sheriff is a friend of your father's, but he can only cover up so much if Sophia's name is on the incident report. So what are you saying? I asked, though deep down, the sickening truth was already taking shape. My father walked over, ending his call. He looked at me not as a daughter, but as an asset to be liquidated for a higher return. You're going to tell the sheriff you were driving Sophia's car, Rachel, Dad said flatly. You took it to run an errand for the campaign. You swerved to miss a deer. You hit the scooter. I stared at him in utter disbelief. You want me to take the fall for a hit and run? Dad, a DUI and a hit and run charge will destroy a legal career. I could lose my license. Mom let out a cruel, dismissive bark of laughter. What legal career, Rachel? Mom sneered, waving her hand violently. You've been floating from one low-level legal temp job to another for 5 years. You have no reputation. You have no future in law. But your sister is on the cusp of greatness. Her political race matters. Your name doesn't. Sophia stepped forward, wiping a smudge of dirt from her cheek. She looked at me, her mouth twisting into a mocking, confident smile. Come on, Rachel. Sophia laughed softly, her tone dripping with patronizing pity. Look at you. You're nobody. No one would ever trust you in a courtroom anyway. Take the misdemeanor, let Dad's lawyers pay the fine, and stop being so dramatic. It's not like you have anything left to lose. Standing there in the dark, wrapped in the cold rain, watching the 3 people who were supposed to love me treat my life like trash to be swept under Sophia's red carpet, something inside me clicked. The hurt vanished. The longing for their approval burned away to ash. In its place rose a cold, terrifying, absolute clarity. They thought I was nobody. They thought I had no power. They genuinely believed that Sophia was the one who held the courtrooms in the palm of her hand. All right, I whispered, stepping back toward my car. If that's how you want to play it. Sophia grinned, thinking she had won. Dad nodded in stern approval, already turning back to his phone. They had no idea that when the sun rose tomorrow, they weren't going to be dealing with the failed child. They were going to be dealing with the federal judiciary. And that was the final error of her life. I slid into the driver's seat of my car, pulled the door shut, and turned the key. Through the rain-streaked windshield, I watched my family standing on the shoulder of Oak Ridge Road. Sophia was smoothing her coat, already transitioning back into the poised, untouchable candidate. Dad was giving a firm nod of satisfaction, convinced he had once again managed the universe to his exact liking. Mom was waving her hands at me, motioning for me to move my car out of sight before the local authorities arrived. They thought I was pulling into a side lot to wait for their instructions. Instead, I put the car in drive, hit the gas, and pulled out onto the main road, heading straight toward the city center. I didn't go to the local sheriff's station. Sheriff Miller was a longtime golf buddy of my father's, a man whose campaign coffers had been quietly lined by Anderson Real Estate for over a decade. Going through local law enforcement meant letting Dad control the narrative, hide the blood alcohol tests, and turn a hit and run into an untraceable traffic mishap. I pulled into the quiet, pristine parking garage of the federal building downtown. My keycard buzzed green at the executive elevator, taking me up to the top floor, to my chambers. The floor was dark and silent, save for the hum of the server rooms. I unlocked my main office, bypassed the grand mahogany desk, and sat down at my terminal. For 30 minutes, the only sound in the room was the furious rhythmic clatter of my typing. I didn't file a police report. I authored an official judicial notice of potential obstruction of justice, civil rights violations, and state-level corruption. I detailed every word spoken on that road. Dad's explicit attempt to tamper with evidence, Mom's admission of paying off the private medical transport, and Sophia's confession of operating a vehicle while impaired. I attached my personal dashcam footage, a discreet high-definition lens mounted on my rearview mirror that had captured the entire exchange on the shoulder, including Sophia's laughter and Dad's threats. Then, I routed the sealed file directly to the Special Investigations Unit of the Department of Justice and the United States Attorney for the Northern District. When you sit on the federal bench, your signature carries the full weight of the United States government. When a sitting federal district judge submits sworn testimony regarding felony evidence tampering involving state officials, the federal machine doesn't just respond, it moves with terrifying, violent speed. By 7 a.m. the next morning, I was back in my chambers, freshly dressed in a crisp dark suit, sipping black coffee. My phone began to ring. It was Dad. I let it go to voicemail. By 8:30 a.m., he had called 9 times. Finally, a text came through from Mom. Rachel, where are you? The sheriff says you never showed up to take the report. Sophia is panicking. Answer your father right now. I didn't reply. I simply picked up my leather folder, draped my black silk judicial robe over my arm, and walked down the hall to Courtroom 4B. Today was the opening day of a major state versus corporate regulatory hearing. The courtroom was packed with regional press, high-profile attorneys, state political liaisons, and curious citizens. Because of the high-stakes nature of the case, local media outlets had cameras set up in the back row to broadcast the proceedings. Sitting right in the middle of the gallery, looking frantic and exhausted, were my mother and father. They had come to the courthouse to track down the magistrate clerk, hoping to use Dad's connections to locate me or fix the missing accident report. They had wandered into the main federal courtroom, likely thinking it was just another local open-door proceeding where they could pull a few strings. Mom caught my eye through the double glass doors before I stepped into the judicial anteroom. Her face was contorted in fury. She gestured wildly toward the hallway as if commanding a toddler to step out of line. Dad crossed his arms, his mouth set in a hard, disappointment-filled line. They still thought they were looking at their useless temp clerk daughter who had ruined their morning schedule. Then the heavy oak doors at the front of the courtroom swung open. "All rise," the bailiff's voice boomed through the high-ceilinged room, echoing off the marble walls. The United States District Court for the Northern District is now in session. Honorable Judge Rachel Anderson presiding. The entire courtroom rose in unison. I stepped out from behind the curtain, wearing the heavy black robe of the federal judiciary. I didn't look at the press. I didn't look at the attorneys. I kept my eyes fixed entirely on my parents. The transformation on their faces was a masterpiece of absolute horror. Mom's jaw went completely slack, her hand freezing in midair. Dad leaned back against the pew behind him as if he had been struck in the chest with a sledgehammer, his face draining of every drop of color. Their minds were desperately trying to reconcile the image of the daughter they had spent a lifetime degrading, with the woman now walking up the steps to the highest seat in the room. I took my seat behind the elevated mahogany bench, the Great Seal of the United States gleaming directly above my head. I adjusted my microphone, the rustle of my robe amplified throughout the silent hall. I looked down at them from the bench. I gave them a small, polite, icy smile, the kind a judge gives to a spectator who is about to be dragged out by federal marshals. "Please be seated," I announced, my voice carrying effortlessly across the room. Dad slumped into the wooden pew, his hands trembling. Mom gripped her designer handbag so tightly her knuckles turned white. They were paralyzed. Before I could call the first motion on the docket, my bench phone buzzed softly. It was a secure line from my chief clerk. "Judge Anderson," he whispered. "The FBI Regional Field Office just notified us. Federal warrants have officially been issued for witness tampering, conspiracy, and hit and run against Sophia Anderson, Richard Anderson, and Lydia Anderson. Federal agents are en route to serve them now." I looked out into the gallery one last time. "Thank you, clerk," I said softly into the receiver. "Let them in." Before we dive into this final explosive chapter, take a quick second to hit that like button if you're enjoying the story, and leave your thoughts down in the comments. I love reading how you think this will end. The quiet dignity of Courtroom 4B was shattered 3 minutes later when the heavy brass doors at the back of the gallery clicked open. 4 broad-shouldered agents from the FBI Federal Special Investigations Unit, dressed in dark tailored suits with gold shields pinned to their lapels, filed inside. They didn't make a scene. They didn't draw weapons. They simply walked with heavy, deliberate steps down the center aisle, their presence immediately sucking the air out of the room. The press gallery turned, cameras shifting away from the defense table toward the rear of the court. Mom froze. Dad half stood, his hands trembling as he reached into his jacket pocket for his phone, likely preparing to call the governor or the state police chief, anyone who had ever taken a check from Anderson Real Estate. "Richard Anderson? Lydia Anderson?" Lead Agent Miller's voice rang out, crisp and devoid of emotion. "What is the meaning of this?" Dad sputtered, his voice cracking, trying to summon the authority he had wielded for decades in county boardrooms. "Do you have any idea who I am? My daughter is running for state legislature. We are guests of—" "Sir, you and your wife are under arrest pursuant to a federal warrant issued by the Northern District." Agent Miller cut him off smoothly, stepping forward to apply steel cuffs to my father's wrists. "You are charged with federal obstruction of justice, conspiracy to tamper with a witness, and accessory to a hit-and-run incident. A collective gasp swept through the gallery. Camera shutters began clicking like a swarm of cicadas. Mom shrieked as an agent stepped behind her, pinning her arms behind her back. Her designer leather bag dropped to the polished floor, spilling high-end lipstick, political donor lists, and campaign buttons across the marble. "Rachel!" Mom screamed, looking up toward the bench, her face contorted in a terrifying mix of rage, panic, and sheer disbelief. "Rachel, tell them who we are. Tell them it's a mistake. You're the judge here. Fix this." I sat behind the high mahogany bench, my hands resting calmly over the case file in front of me. My expression remained entirely placid, an unreadable mask of judicial neutrality. "Order in the court," I said calmly into the microphone, my voice echoing off the vaulted ceilings. "Agents, please remove the defendants from the courtroom so these proceedings may continue." "Rachel, you worthless little snake!" Mom shrieked as she was pulled back toward the double doors. "We gave you everything! After all we did for you, you're going to ruin your sister's life over a stupid traffic accident?" "Sophia is already in custody, Mrs. Anderson," Agent Miller added quietly as he escorted her out. "A federal team picked her up at campaign headquarters 20 minutes ago." The heavy doors closed behind them, cutting off her shouts. The gallery was in utter chaos. Reporters were furiously typing on their laptops, local journalists were rushing toward the exit to break the story of the decade, and the corporate attorneys sitting at the bar were staring at me in absolute speechless awe. I adjusted my glasses, struck my gavel once onto the sound block, and looked down at the court reporter. "Let the record reflect an administrative pause," I said softly. "We will now proceed with the docket." 3 months later, the dust had finally settled, leaving behind the charred ruins of my family's legacy. Because the hit-and-run involved an attempt to frame a sitting member of the federal judiciary, the Department of Justice took no chances. The dashcam footage from my car, capturing Sophia's arrogant laughter, Dad's explicit commands to lie, and Mom's declaration that my name meant nothing, was admitted into evidence. It was leaked to the press within 48 hours of their arrest. Sophia's political campaign vanished overnight. Her sponsors pulled their funding, her law license was permanently revoked, and she eventually pled guilty to felony hit-and-run and obstruction, receiving a 2-year sentence in state prison. Dad's real estate firm dissolved under the weight of federal financial audits triggered by the investigation, revealing years of local bribes and tax fraud. He lost the family estate, his political capital, and his fortune. Mom, stripped of her social status and living in a modest rented townhouse funded by the liquidation of her jewelry, tried to write to me 3 times from the local detention facility. I returned every letter unopened. I sat in my chambers late one Friday afternoon, looking out over the city skyline as the winter sun set in streaks of gold and purple. On my desk lay a small silver frame, not containing a family portrait, but a copy of my Senate confirmation document, bearing the seal of the President of the United States. My parents had spent my entire life trying to define me by their shallow standards. They believed that because I didn't shout my accomplishments from the rooftops, I possessed no authority. They believed that because I loved peace, I was too weak to defend myself. They thought I was the failed child. They thought Sophia was the future. They believed no one would ever trust me in a courtroom. I took a final sip of my tea, closed the case binder in front of me, and smiled into the quiet dusk. They were right about one thing: no one in that family will ever doubt my power again.